Hi there, happy hump day and welcome to Wednesday. We have certainly been living in some strange times. And one of the things that I've noticed, and this would be similar for many people, is how the pattern of how I work has changed. Because of course in the past I used to spend lots of time on a plane, traveling, getting from an event to an event, workshop to workshop. Whereas now I'm spending the majority of my time in my home office. The one benefit of this is that it created space, capacity to slow down a bit. And in that stillness, in that slowness, it gave me time to think and to reflect. It created that space that I needed to come up with new ideas, to think about how I could approach things differently. Now, it's curious when I say that because at the same time, over the last couple of years, and even as we look into this year, there's a lot of still weirdness and huge amounts of uncertainty and loads of ambiguity. And sure, all of that played with my emotions and impacted how on many days I was feeling and how I was approaching things. And yet at the same time, I also had space to think differently. Back in 2020, the World Economic Forum released some updated elements in relation to the future of work and also the future of learning. And the World Economic Forum provide really interesting data about where is the world of work going, and what does that mean then for the competencies and the capabilities that people are going to need now and into the future. And the specific piece of research that they released in 2020 related to what are the types of skills that they think are going to be needed in a post-pandemic world. And they listed 4 key elements. The first one was what they called future literacy. And this was really enabling people to better imagine and make sense of what the future was going to hold. Number 2 was systems thinking. Now, systems thinking as a concept has been around for a while, but it's a reminder that it's important to look for those connections, understand the context in which you're working. So really having that mindset to think through, to communicate and learn about connected systems, and not just connected systems in terms of the way you work, but also how you live. Because when you apply a systems thinking approach, you're able to identify problems, identify patterns in those problems. And when you can see the patterns, you're able to approach the problem solving differently. The third one, anticipation. How is it that you are learning to recognize the possible futures and then use that developed consciousness to shape the decisions and the actions that you're taking now, as well as the ones that you're thinking about taking into the future. Lastly, number 4, strategic foresight. So that ability to broaden your exploration of alternative futures and better investigate the worldview that underlies possible, plausible, probable, and preferred futures. So there's 4 key elements there. What strikes me about all of them is there's one key ingredient that you really need to have in place to be able to leverage those, and that's space. Space and thinking time. And yet so often we're rushing from meeting to meeting, event to event, obligation to obligation. And it can feel impossible to find the time to do that. And so many of us are socialized into seeing busyness as us making progress. And yet often when we want to make progress, busyness isn't going to help us, because with real progress, to get that real progress, you need deep thinking. And you can't do deep thinking when you're busy. You can't do deep thinking when you're rushing. You can't do deep thinking without having that time and space to ponder, to wonder, to imagine, to investigate. And sometimes that means you need to feel like you're wasting time, because it's when we're wasting time, isn't it interesting that we even call it wasting time, but when we're doing things that don't necessarily have a defined outcome attached to it, that's often when we come up with our best ideas. Those days when you're sitting at the beach, those days when you're casually going for a walk, doing some art, doing some craft, doing something that takes you away from your day job. All of those things that don't necessarily have a specific objective attached to it. You know, the brilliant historian and author Yuval Noah Harari talks about this, and in his writings he says, if you want to go deeply into any subject, you need a lot of time. And in particular, you need the privilege of wasting time. You need to experiment with unproductive paths, explore dead ends, and to make space for doubt and boredom, and to allow these little seeds of insight to slowly grow and blossom. And he says, if you can't afford to waste time, you'll never find the truth. So to thrive in this ever-changing world that we're living in, we need dedicated space to think, to ponder, to reflect, and to analyze ideas so that we can have that space for the insights to arise. And once we have those ideas, we actually need to be comfortable to not hold on to them too tightly, because perhaps that idea is just in germination phase and it needs to be refined. Perhaps that idea needs to be discarded and something else picked up. So we need to be open to being challenged and debated and stretched. And finding all of that time, that doesn't happen by accident. It's actually about scheduling it, being really deliberate about how and where you're going to have space in your day to just sit around and not do a lot, to give yourself that time and space that you need. So when you think about this, ask yourself, what about and what would it look like if for you doing more actually started with you doing less? And what could that look like for you? One of my favorite travel writers, Pico Iyer, once remarked, in an age of movement, nothing is more critical than stillness. Some wise words to ponder. Take care. I'll see you next week.